Somewhere, someone was the first person to float on purpose. We will never know their name, their language, or what they were thinking. We do not know the river. We do not know the year. We are not even certain it was a person rather than a much older cousin of ours. And yet it happened, and it changed the shape of the human world. Because before that moment, water was a wall. A river decided where a group could go and where it could not. A coastline was the end of the map. And after it, water became the fastest road anyone had ever had. So how do you build the first boat, with no metal and nobody to ask? Here is the strange part. We have the proof it happened. We just do not have the boat. Start with the strongest evidence, and it is not a boat at all. It is a continent. People reached Australia at least 65,000 years ago. That is not a walk. There has never been a land bridge the whole way. Even when sea levels were at their lowest, open water remained. Stretches of it, deep, moving, and wide enough that the far side is not always visible. So the people who arrived did not wander in. They crossed. And you cannot cross that by accident, once, and start a population. A viable group needs numbers. Numbers mean repeat trips. Repeat trips mean it was not luck. It was a craft, and someone knew how to use it. And Australia is not even the oldest hint. On the island of Flores in Indonesia, stone tools sit in very old layers. Layers far older than our own species. Flores has been an island for a very long time, with water around it. Which raises a question nobody has fully answered. Something got across. We do not know how deliberate it was. Maybe a raft. Maybe a storm-torn mat of vegetation carrying passengers. Honest answer. We do not know. Both are on the table. But the pattern across the world keeps repeating. Islands get occupied. Coastlines get followed. New land keeps being reached. Every one of those arrivals is a boat we never found. So where are they? Why is the evidence a continent instead of a canoe? Because of what boats are made of. Wood, reeds, bark, plant fiber, animal hide. Every single one of those rots. Stone survives for 1,000,000 years. A hollowed trunk does not. Leave timber on a riverbank, and in a century there is nothing left to find. Unless something very unusual happens to it. It has to be buried fast, in wet ground, with no air reaching it. Waterlogged peat, thick river silt, a bog that never dries out. Those conditions are rare, and they are not where most people lived. So the record we have is not a record of the oldest boats. It is a record of the luckiest ones. The oldest one we can actually hold is about 10,000 years old. It is a hollowed pine trunk, found in the Netherlands, small and narrow. Which is remarkable, and also completely misleading if you stop there. Because people were crossing open water 50,000 years before it was carved. The gap between those two numbers is the whole problem. Now think about how you would actually start. Almost certainly, the first idea was not built. It was noticed. A tree comes down in a flood and drifts past, and it does not sink. Someone watches that, and the idea is now loose in the world. But there is an enormous distance between a floating log and a boat. And anyone who has tried it knows why. A log floats. A log is also almost perfectly round. Which means it does the one thing you least want it to do. It rolls. Floating and staying upright are two completely different problems. Buoyancy is free. The wood does that for you whether you understand it or not. Stability is not free. Stability has to be built. And here is the thing that makes a round trunk so treacherous. Every time you shift your weight, the log answers. Lean a little to correct it, and it rolls further the same way. Correct again, harder, and you are now in the river. So the first real invention was not floating. Everyone could see floating. The first real invention was making the floating thing stop turning over. And there are only a few ways to solve that with what a riverbank offers. The first is width. Put things side by side. Lash several trunks together, and the whole thing cannot roll independently. That is a raft, and it is almost certainly older than any carved boat. It is slow, it is wet, and it is very hard to steer. It is also almost impossible to tip over, which is exactly the point. The second answer is bundles. Reeds, tied tight, in great thick sheaves. Individually, a reed is nothing. Bound together, they carry serious weight. Reed craft were still being built in living memory, in more or less that shape, which tells you the design works, and that it is very old. And the third answer is the one everybody pictures. Take the round trunk and remove the middle of it. It sounds obvious. It is not obvious at all. Hollowing does two useful things, and only one of them is space. The cavity holds people and cargo, which is the part everyone sees. But it also drops the weight of the craft low, beneath the waterline. Low weight resists rolling. The craft wants to sit upright. And that single property is what turns a log into a vessel. So how do you hollow a trunk with no metal tools at all? Slowly. That is the honest answer, and it is the whole story. You do not cut wood with stone the way metal cuts wood. Stone does not slice a clean line. Stone bruises and splits. So you work across the grain, breaking fibers a few at a time. It is chipping, not sawing, and it takes days. Which is why the real tool is not the stone at all. It is fire. But not fire the way you are imagining it. Set a whole trunk alight, and you do not get a boat. You get ash. The trick is to keep the fire small, and keep it exactly where you want it. You light a controlled fire along the top face of the trunk. You let it char the surface, just the surface. And critically, you protect the parts you want to keep. Wet clay, wet bark, wet hides, anything that will not burn. Then you put the fire out, and you scrape the burnt layer away. Charred wood is soft. It comes off with a shell or a stone edge. Underneath is clean wood again, and the trunk is very slightly hollower. Then you do it again. Burn, scrape, check the walls, burn again. Days of it, possibly weeks, depending on the tree. And the whole time you are making a judgment you cannot take back. How thin do you dare make the walls? Too thick and the craft is heavy, low in the water and hard to move. Too thin and it splits, and weeks of work end in the first hour of use. There is no gauge. There is no number to check against. There is only the sound it makes, and whether the last one worked. Which is how almost all early technology actually advanced. Not with a breakthrough. With a long queue of failures nobody recorded. The first attempt probably split. The second was probably too heavy. The third might have floated perfectly and steered like a wet log. Nobody wrote any of that down, because nobody could write. It was carried in hands and eyes, and taught by standing next to someone. And even a finished hull is only about half of the invention. Because the boat is not the hard part. The water is the hard part. Put a loaded craft on moving water, and everything you know stops applying. Weight has to be spread, or one end lifts and the other digs in. Put the load too high and the craft becomes unstable all over again. So somebody had to work out where cargo goes, by getting it wrong. Then there is the water itself, which is never one single thing. Current runs faster in the middle of a channel than at the edges. It accelerates around rocks and headlands, and it circles back behind them. A surface that looks flat and calm can be moving very fast indeed. None of that is visible. All of it had to be learned and passed on. And then, finally, the biggest step of all. Coastal travel is one thing. You can always see where you are. Crossing to an island you can see is harder, but the target never moves. Crossing to an island you cannot see is a completely different act. It means trusting that land exists because of birds, swell, cloud, and stars. It means committing, with your family aboard, before you have any proof. and a craft that carries one fisher for an afternoon will not do. A crossing craft has to hold people, water, food, tools, and time. So the boat and the journey grew into each other over thousands of years. Which brings us back to the thing we will never have. The first boat is gone. It rotted on a bank, or burned, or lies under a risen sea. Everything it started is still here. We just never got to keep the boat.